Well, howdy folks, and welcome back to Pecan Ranch. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about a mobile pig shelter for pasture raised pigs. As you folks know, I had a little bit of an issue with the pigs not really knowing where their bed was, especially their first night out on a new pasture. So I have come up with a solution to that, and I'm going to get them their sweet feed. They're just now waking up out of bed, and I'll discuss this particular design, this idea, here in a minute. Good morning, Wilbur. How are you? How are you, piggies? Let's get a little bit of sweet feed treat in there for you. Oh yes, I know. Hey, I'm coming to this side too. Get me a little scoopy scoop here. Come on, check it out, piggies. Oh, you still got some in here. All right. There you go. There you go. There you go. All right, piggy. So a couple things to discuss today. As you can kind of basically see, we got a torrential downpour late into the night, early in the morning. It actually woke me up, and I've been up for several hours just waiting on a little bit of daylight, because I knew these piggies weren't going to be getting up anytime soon. But as you can see, look, this is my pond. This is my overflow, which I may honestly need to redesign some of this drainage through here, the way that it flows. This is my overflow of my pond. When it rains, fills it up, it ends up flowing down here, ties into a creek off in the woods where a lot of the neighboring pasture ponds drain into. But it's kind of soupy out here today, and that's kind of a good thing for multiple reasons. One, I get to test out. I'm getting to see my couple of my projects in action. One of which is a project that I had detailed. If you haven't seen this video in building this, go back and take a look at it. But this DIY pig feeder, all that feed in there is nice and dry. And I knew that it'd be dry from like a little bit of rain, but I was kind of concerned and wondering how well it'd stay dry in like a thunderstorm. And boy, we got it last night. And I couldn't help but be concerned as I lie awake in bed this morning at about 3:30 in the morning when thunder shook the house, knowing that my pigs were out here, and that first night that they were out here, how they were kind of uneasy about being out here and wanting to get back to their home. But I felt confident in my new pig shelter, that I knew that they would have taken shelter there and would have felt safe and comfortable here. So, and they did. This morning as we rolled up, they were still in bed, and this is it right here. This is the design. It is very simple, and it is very inexpensive. So the reason I want to talk to you folks about this particular pasture pig shelter is I've been racking my brain trying to think of what I wanted to set up out here that could be mobile, lightweight, and inexpensive. So I had, initially when we moved them out here, we had put a bunch of straw. It's old hay that my neighbors had, that it's several years old, and so it's not really good value for hay, and is being used as bedding now. We had set it up in this thicket over there, and then I just got to thinking, and I thought, well, what if it rains? They'd be nice and warm over there, but if it rains, they'd be fine if they get wet. But my thought was their bedding will get wet, and then they won't have dry bedding. It could potentially, you know, a pile of straw or hay that gets rained on is going to get moldy, and they're just not going to have good bedding. And so I'd have to constantly be changing out bedding. And then a second problem that I had been thinking about is, now that I had got them comfortable with that spot over there, if I move pastures, are they going to look longingly this direction for where they had spent most of their nights for about a month that they'll be spending on this pasture? Is that where they're going to want to go to bed? Because we had that issue when they first moved out here. They wanted to go to bed back up near the house at the front pasture in the pig training pen. So we could have built a shelter like we have up at the house. Problem is with that shelter is it's not as easy to move, to take down and set up. But just gotta check this fence. Ooh, yep, that side's hot too. It's not impossible to move. It's just not as convenient as I would like, as I'm kind of going through the paces here. And so then I think of, well, if I set it up to where it could be on skids, then I could just drag it across. Well, then comes the issue of being able to move it across the fence without having the fence down for, taken down for too long while pigs are out here. And anytime I'm out here working, they love to be in my business. And in fact, just setting this up last night was a bit of a chore, because I was laying the tarp out and I had to keep moving pigs out of the way because they wanted to check out the tarp. They wanted to see what was going on. So I'm thinking to myself, if we move on to the next pasture and we have to drag something on skids, like a hoop house like I have set up front, but if we set it up on a skid base that we could just slide it over, I've got to push these wires down and slide it across, and that also puts additional strain on the wire. It's going to put more wear on it, and so I thought that's just not going to work. So here I am scouring the internet for designs and ideas on mobile pasture raised pig shelters, and everything kept coming up was little three-sided shelters. And yeah, I could pick them up with the tractor, move it over, but I wanted something that wasn't going to be difficult at all. And then I'm looking through, and then I have an idea, and I think to myself, well, I've been camping before. What if I just set up something? I just need something to keep them out of the rain. They can stay warm with their body heat and good enough bedding in there. That won't be an issue. So I thought, well, we'll just set up a tarp tent. Then the question arose, well, how do you do it in an open field where you don't have trees to tie to? Well, I'll use T-posts for my ridge line. And so I've got the T-post set up for the ridge line, and normally if I put up a tarp tent, like if I'm going camping or something, I'd stake it to the ground. But the concern that I had was, well, the pigs are going to root that up. They're going to grab it, they're going to take it loose, and the corner gets loose, it's just going to flap in the wind and get tore up. So why not, let's just go T-post all around. And then we can tie it up just a little bit taller. And realistically, so the pigs could reach this, they really could. But thing is about pigs, is most of their existence, most of their life is basically from about here down. They're not really looking up too much. So this doesn't really get their attention, and it should be pretty sturdy. The T-posts themselves make for decent little scratching posts. I don't have to worry about them. They're sturdy, they're 6-foot posts, they're sunk pretty decently into the ground. And so then the question remains now, well, how am I going to move them? Well, I've got two different methods of pulling T-posts, and any farmer should have these. And I've got a farm jack that with the T-post adapter that could easily pull these things out. I also have an actual T-post remover, which is a little bit more lightweight and easier to move around. And that tool works phenomenally as well, and is relatively inexpensive. Every farmer should have one. So So sinking the T-post, not a big deal. I've got a gas-powered T-post driver. Even if you don't, there's only 6 T-posts, so you're not going to wear yourself out too bad if you've got to manually drive them in. And then pulling them up, not a big deal. I just pull these up and we'll move on to the next pasture. It's so cost effective as well that I could really, if I wanted to, I could build a second setup, and so we could have one pre-set up in the next pasture, and when we move them over, we don't have to take this one down until we take the rest of this wire down to set up the pasture after the one that they'll be in, so 2 pastures from now. So let's talk a little bit about cost. I'm sure most of you have already done the math in your head, but the T-posts are about roughly $3 or $4 a piece, depending upon where you're getting them at. And we've got 6 of them, so let's call them $4 a piece, and that's $24. We got a tarp, a good heavy-duty tarp, so that way it'll withstand the weather for hopefully a good long while. And even if I have to replace it every couple months, that's really not that big of a deal, because this tarp was 15 bucks. So you're talking about $40 where we're at now. Now then there's also paracord or rope. You could count that as a cost. I usually have plenty of extra laying around, but let's say 10 bucks in paracord. So we're total into this thing $50. 50 bucks for a shelter. So yeah, if the tarp gets thrashed in a month or so, no big deal. Another 15 bucks. And I would honestly happily pay $15 a month to ensure that my pigs are going to have comfortable shelter and have a means that I can easily move it on my rotational grazing system. So how do we have it set up? We've got our 6 T-posts. We have our ridgeline T-posts and the way I set it up is I laid the tarp out, and then I just stuck the T-post kind of barely in the ground to get my layout. I set up these center ones first, and then I went to the corners and went out just a little ways on all 4 corners, and then strung my ridge line across, and then put the tarp over, and at each corner tied my paracord to these T-posts, and I put it up a little bit off the ground so it's kind of out of the pigs' field of view, and they're not going to really mess with that paracord. Now, and then I went ahead and just for added security and durability and keeping this tarp relatively taut, is I added another paracord right here that just runs around this on either side. Now, a tip when you're doing this is think ahead, because you're going to want to take this down and move it to the next place. So don't go and tie knots that are going to be impossible to get loose, or make it to where you're going to have to cut rope every single time and have to go through 50 feet of paracord every single time that you set it up. So if you don't know how to tie a slip knot, I guess we'll have a quick lesson real quick. So what I'll do, 2 things. So whenever I'm running a rope like this to a tarp, I will tie myself a little cinch knot, a tightening knot here, and this, or a loop right here. So this loop, what it allows me to do is I can run this line through here, and then I can pull on this and get it tight. Now that you've got it nice and tight, you can take it and kind of pinch it right here, and that'll hold the tension. And then you take your rope and you loop it through like such. Do not pull it all the way through. Leave yourself a little loop like that. And again, this was not necessarily a knot tutorial, but that's just a quick, a quick little lesson on tying yourself a slip knot. And now all I have to do to take it down is if I pull on this tag end here, it'll undo that knot, and that will make it so I'm gonna have to untie knots. It's easy. I just pull my tag ends, and then I can move it on to the next place without having to cut any rope or untie knots. And so always have in all of your little setups here, just tie yourself a non-slipping knot with a loop in it, so that way you can run basically a cinch on it and then do a slip knot to terminate that line and tie it off. And then that allows you to be able to take it down and move it on in the future. Thing is about pigs is they can be rough on structures. So if you notice, the only thing that they really have access to is the T-post, and T-posts will withstand the test of time against pigs. Your tarp, my tarp is kind of a little bit low, and I did that kind of intentionally so that we don't get too many crosswinds here. And by the way, this is an 8 by 12 foot tarp. You can really you can make this any size you need based off of whatever tarp you're going to get. You could go larger, you could go with 10 by 20. You could go really as large as you want. You may need more T-posts, because the larger you get, you may need some in between instead of just on the corners. It's a real simple setup for a shelter that's cost effective, and it will be easy to move. Honestly, it'd probably take me less than half an hour to pull all these T-posts up, set it up at the next place, and boom, we've got a good shelter. Not only that, but even if we need to move the shelter before we're moving pastures, I can pick this up and move it, you know, over here to the other side or something, move it around, so that way I don't have this necessarily just this one spot right here. But so far I have noticed that my pigs tend to not use their shelters as a bathroom, so they're not really making too much of a mess of it. But so the pigs are real happy out here. They're doing good out here now, especially now that we've got our shelter. And I'd say that a few key pieces of advice is, when you first move into a new pasture, learn from my mistakes and set yourself up a shelter on that pasture, because that will, especially if they started out in a training pen, when they first move to a pasture, depending upon how long they spent in that training pen, they may think that that is their home and they really want to try and get back to it, especially in my case where they're not a far walk from it and they know how they got out here and they were trying to get back. So have a shelter, show them their food, show them their water. They have shelter, food, and water, and plenty of forage. They're gonna be just happy out in your pasture, and they won't have much motivation to try and get through fence. So I've got to get along, get some more chores done. It is wet out here. We've got new creeks flowing that I've never seen flow before. We've got water just everywhere. But the animals are dry, they're comfortable, and so they're happy, I'm happy. I'm gonna go get the rest of these animals fed, and I hope that you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the thumbs up button. Subscribe so you don't miss any videos. Go ahead and leave a comment below. What do you think of this shelter? Do you think that it's gonna stand the test of time? Even if it does, you know, is it so cost effective, it's so cheap that you would consider setting it up, even if it is going to need a tarp replacing every couple months or so? Do you have any ideas that aren't floating around on the internet that would be good for mobile shelters set up for pigs on pasture? Because it seems like there's just that one or two designs that everyone seems to use, and they're good designs. They just didn't tailor meet my specific operation, and maybe you had the same issue as well, and you're thinking to yourself, is there a better idea out there? And maybe you came up with it as well, came up with another idea as well. So comment below if you've got other design ideas for mobile pig shelters to move around on a pasture, or if you just have any suggestions for topics of videos. Well, folks, I hope this has been informative for you. Until the next time, we will see you all back at the ranch.